So here, I'll put the stick in the hole. Here, there's a hole drilled through the condyle. Same on both sides. There's a hole drilled through the condyle. That's called the hypoglossal canal. That's a hole drilled in the bone. Again, that's for the hypoglossal nerve. So you got the occipital bone, the foramen magnum, occipital condyles, and the hypoglossal canal. One on each side. The other thing that may be on the list is right here. So as you come down the bone, it gets a little bit smooth up here, gets a little more rough. Right here in the central area, there's supposed to be a slight elevation. It's right there, slight elevation. This one's much better. See that bump right there? See that elevation right there? That's called the external occipital protuberance. External occipital protuberance. You can usually feel that on the back of your head. If you slide down the bone, you should come to an elevated spot. This one's quite large. This one is not so large. All right. So that's occipital bone, parietal, frontal. This is called the temporal. And again, there is a connection, a suture between the temporal and the parietal. This is called the squamous suture, squamous. So we have the coronal, the sagittal, the lambdoid, and the squamous. Those are the only 4 sutures to know. Keep in mind that wherever a bone meets another bone, there's a suture name. There's lots of sutures. We're doing 4, the 4 main ones. Squamous, temporal bone. Does the temporal bone have parts? It has external parts that we can see here, and it has internal parts that you have to view from the inside the skull. Externally, you have this thing sticking off. That's a process. This thing, process, and this little sharp one, process. So you have 1, 2, 3 processes. This one, because it attaches to this yellow thing, the zygomatic bone, this is called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Zygomatic process, temporal bone. So the part name is zygomatic process. The bone name is temporal bone. The sharp one is called the styloid process. Very thin, very sharp, very pointy. And the big fat one is called the mastoid process. Mastoid, styloid, and zygomatic processes. So 1, 2, 3 processes. And a big deep hole. That's your ear canal. That's what the sound passes through. That's called the external acoustic meatus. External acoustic meatus. Those are all parts of the temporal. Those you can see from the outside. Remember also, with regard to the temporal, underneath here there's a depression. There's what's known as the mandibular fossa. Remember, the mandible connects to, let me see, it's easier to do here. The mandible sits in a deep fossa. A deep fossa, that's the temporomandibular joint. Okay? That's also on the temporal bone, on the underside. That's what you see from the outside. But to cut this open, cut it open, there's a piece of the temporal bone inside. The temporal bone's right here. Right here. We're talking about this section here. This section here. That's temporal bone inside. Temporal bone outside. Temporal bone inside. And what you want to look for is this big, thick triangle ridge of bone here. There's one on each side. Like a pyramid shape of bone. Pyramid shape of bone. That's also part of the temporal. That's called the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Petrous portion. It's significant because, remember the ear canal? Well, the ear canal is a canal that's drilled through the bone. It goes all the way in, like this stick. And that's drilled through the petrous portion, this thick piece of bone, petrous portion. The canal is drilled through that so that sound waves can get through the bone to the eardrum. Inside of this petrous portion are all the pieces that you need for hearing. Your eardrum, the tiny little bones and the canals and the fluid that's needed for hearing is embedded here in the petrous portion. And we have a model of this. We have a model of this petrous portion with an ear attached to it to show you this and the details of this. It's a large model we can pull out. So, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, zygomatic process, styloid process, mastoid process, external acoustic meatus, and when you look inside, the petrous portion of the temporal bone. These are parts of the temporal, along with probably is listed the squamous suture. Okay? Now, you see the blue, you see the brown, you see the green, you see the tan, you see this big, bright red bone. Seems to touch all of them going across from right to left, all the way across the bottom there. That is the sphenoid bone. Got a finger on the sphenoid here, finger here. These two parts of my fingers are on. These are called the greater wings of the sphenoid. The greater wings. Okay? And the greater wings, follow my fingers, come together here. That's where they end. Right in between the greater wings, this is the body in the center. That's called the body of the sphenoid. The wings are attached to the body. And then you see these things that are sticking up. There's like 4 plates. 1, 2, 3, 4 plates. These are called the pterygoid processes of the sphenoid. Pterygoid processes of the sphenoid. So from the outside, you can see the greater wings, the body, and the pterygoid processes. And yes, each one of these has a name, meaning the ones on the outside here, they're the lateral. The ones on the inside are the medial, but we'll just call them pterygoid processes, right? All 4 of them. They come off the body of the sphenoid. The purple mass, okay? See purple here, here, in here. This is the maxillary bone. And that's the upper jaw, right? The maxillary bone. Pretty big, dense bone. Got the teeth embedded in it. Notice it also has alveolar ridges. These ridges where the teeth fit in, alveolar processes, okay? Like we had on here. Both have alveolar processes. Maxillary bone, sometimes called maxilla. Alveolar processes or ridges. A little point, little spine here in the front. Anterior nasal spine, part of the maxillary. Little hole here. Infraorbital foramen, below the orbit. Those are parts of the maxillary bone. This is the roof of your mouth. Notice it's painted purple. This is called the hard palate of the maxillary bone. It is the roof of your mouth. Now notice that the hard palate has a little red painted in the back here. Now that red looks like this red, unfortunately. This and this are not the same. This is the sphenoid. This is the palatine. This is its own little bone. It's a bone that kind of slides in like so. The U-shaped bone that slides. This is the palatine bone. It's the posterior part of the hard palate. And this is the maxillary bone, the purple. Hard palate. Hard palate. Palatine and maxillary. Now, there are lots of little holes and other things here on the hard palate. Probably not listed in our sheet, but you might see them if you're looking at pictures. The incisive fossa, a little hole, palatine fossa. There are other things. We can't do everything. Okay? That's the maxillary. These are the bones that form the bridge of your nose. Right? These are called nasal bones. There's a right one and a left one. There's no parts for the nasal bone. Next to it, you see bright orange. Okay, there's two little bones embedded in the purple. Those are separate bones. Those are the lacrimal bones. How would you find them? You're looking at this, no painted color. Well, there's your nasal bones here. This is all maxillary here. There's your spine and your alveolar processes. There's your hole. You got to find this hole. There's a big hole. It's called the nasolacrimal canal. There's a big, deep hole in the lacrimal bone. If you can find that hole, you're on the lacrimal bone. That's the only really way to find it. It's right in here. Find the hole, you're on the lacrimal bone. It's the nasolacrimal canal. That's where your tear duct is, to make the tears. Okay? Tears of joy, of course. So you got a lot going on here. You got nasal, you got parts of the maxillary, you got a little hidden orange lacrimal bone in there. Okay? Zygomatic bone. Okay? It has parts, but we're only doing one part. You see the zygomatic bone is connected to the temporal. This is the zygomatic process of the temporal. This is the temporal process of the zygomatic. Temporal process, zygomatic. And they connect. When you put this with this, the whole thing is the zygomatic arch. Zygomatic arch. Now, there's two other bones. Can't really see them well. If you look close at the model, you'll notice when you look in the eye, there's something of bright yellow in there. If you look in the nose, up on the top part there's something bright yellow. Deep inside there is a kind of a rectangular shaped bone embedded in there. That's called the ethmoid. Not easy to see using this model. I got to use a different model for the ethmoid. A model that's cut open so that you can see inside for the ethmoid, but that's in there, ethmoid. The other thing is, if you look in the nasal canal, there's a yellow tannish bone, one on each side, like glued to the wall of the nasal canal. That's its own bone too. That's called the inferior nasal concha. Again, can you look in there and see it? Yes. For the vomer, for the inferior nasal concha, for the ethmoid, I do not use this model. I use a model where it's sliced open. Because yes, you can look in here and you can see all the things in there, but I'm not going to stick a label inside the nose like that. That's hard to do. Okay? Split it open. Right through the nasal cavity. Now, you can see what's inside. There's your inferior nasal concha. That's its own little separate bone. Here's the hard palate of the maxillary bone, right? That's the roof of the mouth. The palatine's in the back. Right here, this area right here is the ethmoid bone. It's deep inside there. All right? This is part of the ethmoid. This is part of the ethmoid. This is part of the ethmoid. This is the inferior nasal concha. This is the middle nasal concha. This is the superior nasal concha. And this is the crista galli. 1, 2, 3. This is all part of the ethmoid. But can you see it here by looking in the nose? Not really that well. See it better here. You can see it here. You can see the top of the ethmoid right here. This is the frontal bone. But right here in the center, there's a depression with a little elevation in the middle. That's the crista galli. That's this little piece of bone that sticks up. That's the crista galli there. and there's a depression on either side of it. It's right in between. It's embedded in the frontal bone. So you got to use other models for the ethmoid. You got to use other models for the vomer.
I have a question. So for the test, would you use the model that you're using right now, or a different model?
This model is great for the concha, the cristagalli, seeing these intimate parts here. This is good to see the cristagalli, the top of the ethmoid here, but that's about it. I don't go in here to look at stuff. Okay. This is the vomer here. See this white line here separating? This is the nasal cavity. The vomer makes a little bit of a wall between the two sides. And then these curlicues, they relate to the concha and the ethmoid. We'll go into more detail of that at a later time, but you have inferior nasal concha, you got middle nasal concha. These little white lines are superior nasal concha. They're all part of the ethmoid. This is the ethmoid bone here. Here's the cristagalli right here. This is the vomer right here. Okay, so you got to use other slices to deal with, say, the vomer and the ethmoid, because they're embedded in here. Okay, you can't get everything from the skull, so we use other models. Yes, we have the petrous portion of the temporal bone. You can see it pretty well, but I also have a model of the petrous portion enlarged to show you the detail of it. But again, a lot going on with the skull. What we haven't done is there's lots of little holes in the sphenoid, in the temporal, in the occipital, holes in the base of the skull. Each hole has a name. There's going to be 3 and 3 and 2. It's going to be about 6, 8, 9 holes in the, you see all those holes, right? Each one of those holes has a name. You can put a stick through the hole. The foramen ovale, the foramen lacerum, the jugular. There's a whole bunch of different holes that exist in the skull also. But there's a lot of stuff. Not just the skull. We got a whole bunch of other bones to do. All right? You need to start using